today on the day that I'm presenting. This slide here is a summary slide. So this is to give you an overview of the federal criteria. I'm going to go into each of these points in detail. But the main idea is that applicants will require a qualifying job offer as well as qualifying work experience, or they might be exempt from the requirement of work experience if they've graduated from a post-secondary institution in Sault Ste. Marie. There are minimum language and education requirements. They also need to have enough settlement funds to show that they can support themselves and their family. And they must intend to live in Sault Ste. Marie. That intent is usually demonstrated by the criteria that are set at the community level and can result in a recommendation from the Community Criteria Committee in Sault Ste. Marie, from the Recommendation Committee, and that is housed within the Sault Ste. Marie Economic Development Corporation. Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to change to the next slide here. All right, so one of the most important things that is to note is that this program requires a qualifying job offer. So what that means is that it needs to be full-time, at least 30 hours per week, and non-seasonal. So it can't be a 6-month contract. There's no end date. The wage must meet or exceed the job bank minimum for the National Occupational Classification. And I'm going to go into detail on the next slide on the National Occupational Classification and explain what that means. But what that means is that if there's a normal minimum wage or normal wage for the job offer, they must be still in that same range. You can't just offer someone a lower wage. Their experience must demonstrate that they can perform the duties of the job, and it must be at the same skill level, one above or one below, that applies to the NOC for their work experience. So explanations here: if it is a NOC 0 offer, their work experience must be at a 0 or A level. If it is an A offer, the work experience must be at a... Alejandra, I believe that might be coming from you. Can you please mute your mic? So for a NOC A offer, it needs to be at a 0, an A, or a B. And there's an exception here for NOC D job offers. The work experience and the offer must be in the same occupation. So I'll get into an explanation here a little more about what the National Occupational Classification, or NOC, does mean. It's a way that immigration can classify what different jobs are within the economic immigration streams to make sure that a job is as it is outlined. So the skill type 0 are often management jobs. The skill level A are usually more professional jobs. Most people would usually have a degree from a university for the A's, so the examples provided are doctors, dentists, architects. For a skill level B, they're usually more technical jobs, skilled trade jobs. These are usually college graduates, and the examples they have provided are chefs and plumbers. Skill level C are jobs that usually have job-specific training, or at a minimum secondary school or high school education. And skill level D are usually from on-the-job training. And the examples there are cleaning staff, fruit pickers. And just to try to help find, if someone needs to find their NOC code, this is an example. So within the website, I did a search for the word nurse. This is some of what came up. So you can see there are a lot of different job titles and job codes that could potentially be related to someone who is a nurse. For the purposes here, at the bottom in purple, you can see I selected practical nurses. This is a program we offer at Sault College, and so it's an example I like to use when explaining this to students. So once you click on that where it was purple, this is what it looks like once you are in the NOC code for licensed practical nurses. So you can see that there's the code. There is also the lead statement, which gives a description of what the job may be. And there's a list of main duties. It's very important to make sure that you read this very, very carefully. It's not enough to say that someone is a practical nurse. They must perform the duties in the description, and they must meet the description in the lead statement. So it's very important to make sure that if someone is saying this is their knock code, that it does in fact match. So back to the federal criteria, now that we have a more clear understanding of what the knock code might mean. You require work experience, or an applicant would require work experience. So this must be 1 year of continuous experience in the last 3 years, and the minimum number of hours they're saying there is 1,560. It must have been in one occupation, although you can combine the full-time and part-time. And the work experience can have been gained either inside or outside Canada, but they must have been earned over at least a 12-month period. So if someone somehow managed to work the 1,560 hours in a 6-month period, it doesn't count. They look at a continuous 12-month period in terms of making sure that someone worked that number of hours, a full-time equivalent, in a 12-month period. And so the work experience must include a substantial number of the main duties in the knock, and I did show you that list, as well as all essential duties listed. So if there are essential duties, you must have performed those things in order to say your work experience was in that knock, as well as activities from the lead statement. Volunteer work, unpaid internships, and self-employed hours will not count here as work experience. And it's also important to note that if your work experience or the applicant's work experience was earned in Canada, they must have had authorization to work in Canada. And some good news for international students. So it's possible that international students can be exempt from work experience. So this is great news for some of the Sault College graduates. They must have earned a degree or diploma certificate from a 2-year or longer program. They must have been full-time students for the duration, and they must have graduated within 18 months of submitting their application for the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot. They also must have studied in Sault Ste. Marie for the length of their studies if they're planning to apply for this pilot program in Sault Ste. Marie. So to be very clear here, a lot of students will come and ask, well, I'm in a 1-year program, what about me? Or I've taken 2 1-year programs, what about me? The explanation we have had thus far is that does not exempt students from the work experience requirement. It doesn't mean that someone can't possibly qualify to apply for the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot. What it means is that they will need to demonstrate work experience.
Sorry, Heather, can I ask you a big favor? Because there is one person who cannot see the screen. So what we can try and doing, if you don't mind, stop sharing the screen and then start sharing it again.
Okay.
We can do it this way.
All right, just give me 1 second here. All right, I've unshared and shared. Oya, can you see?
Yeah, it's loading. Okay, I can see it. If someone is not seeing, please write it down. And maybe, do you think we can share this presentation, Heather?
I'm intending to make a recording of it eventually. And so we can talk about that after the presentation.
Okay, perfect, great. Yeah. I think right now it works for everybody, so that's good.
Great.
Please continue. Sorry about that. Thank you.
That's okay. All right, so now we're looking at the federal requirement for language and education. There is a minimum required for both. For language, it is based on the knock code for your job offer. So if someone has a knock 0 or A, they would need at least a CLB or an NCLC 6. So CLB stands for Canadian Language Benchmark, and NCLC is the Niveau de Compétence Linguistique Canadienne. It's the French. And so it is required that they would submit results that are no more than 2 years old, and it would need to be from a designated language test, which can then equate to the Canadian Language Benchmark. And there's a list of a number of tests that a person could take to show their language. For education, the minimum requirement is the equivalent of a Canadian Canadian high school diploma. And so for immigration purposes, normally to show that you meet the minimum education requirements, you would need to show a credential assessment to show that you have at least met the minimum of Canadian high school. And that credential assessment should be no more than 5 years old. And so for settlement funds, you have to be able to show that you have enough money to support yourself or your family. So an applicant will have to meet a minimum amount unless they're already in Canada working on a valid work permit. So if someone is already here on a valid work permit, then this is not something they will have to demonstrate. Otherwise, this is, and it's tied to the number of family members. So the family would normally mean the primary applicant, their spouse or common law partner, and any dependent children that they may have. This money cannot be borrowed. It must be available and readily so that someone can support themselves. So it's not just a borrow. And they're going to want proof. So this can include bank account statements. This can include property ownership, proof of investment, anything in that realm. And then you must intend to live in Sault Ste. Marie. All applicants must plan to live here. And they'll require a recommendation from the committee in Sault Ste. Marie in order to apply for permanent residence through this pathway. And so this is where we get into the community criteria. This is what has been established by the committee in Sault Ste. Marie for the pilot here in Sault Ste. Marie. This slide here is a summary. I'll go into each area in detail, but what's important to note here is that they have decided to use a point-based system to assess someone's ties to Sault Ste. Marie. So in order to have your application considered by the recommendation committee, someone would need a score of at least 70 or above. And so things that they take a look at are a job offer, the applicant's age and work experience, if they have studied in Sault Ste. Marie, if they have lived here, if they have personal ties. Anyone who has never lived here, there are still opportunities for them to earn points through visiting. There must be a demonstrated interest from the applicant in living here, so whether it's the lifestyle, the culture. There are ways that an applicant with a spouse can earn some points as well, and also for minimum language requirements. So it's important to note this is a specific point system for Sault Ste. Marie. This is not the same as the express entry point system. This is specific to this pilot program and specific to this community. So a job offer, I'm going to say it again, is the most important thing here. Without it, the other criteria just don't really work. So if you have a job offer or an applicant has a job offer in Sault Ste. Marie in one of these priority NOC groups, then there's 55 points assigned out of the minimum 70 required. So it is great for the points. It's also a federal requirement again, so it's essential that there is a full-time permanent job offer in the city of Sault Ste. Marie, and the city has specified these NOC groups as areas of priority. So these are the priority groups. It is possible that the Community Recommendation Committee could consider others. They have said they will at their discretion, but these are the areas that they are currently prioritizing. And to go with the job offer, it's important to note that there are some eligibility criteria for the employer. So it's not just from any employer. It must be an employer located within the boundaries of Sault Ste. Marie, and that's by the ministry guidelines, which can all be checked on the immigration websites. They have to have been in active business in Sault Ste. Marie for at least 3 years. If there's an employer that is here for less time, it's a new investment, they will have to submit a business case. They're going to need to show detailed information on their labor needs, why they think this applicant is their best fit. And they can't have violated the Ontario Employment Standards Act or the Occupational Health and Safety Act. They must be completely up to code in terms of those acts. They need to have at least 3 full-time employees who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents who are working at the location where the candidate will work. They can't be in violation of the Immigration, Refugee and Protection Act or its regulations. And they must demonstrate that they're prepared to welcome and accommodate foreign workers into their workplace. And so there are some steps outlined as to how they can demonstrate this on the Welcome to SSM website under employers. So the applicant's Age is another one of the community criteria. Depending on how old an applicant is, there are points available. And as well as work experience. So if someone has worked at least 2 years, there are points available to them. And there's a bonus here if someone has at least 1 year of continuous full-time experience in Sault Ste. Marie working in the past 5 years, there is a bonus of 8 additional points. People who've studied here, this is exciting for our Sault College graduates and our students currently. If someone has studied in Sault Ste. Marie at a post-secondary institution, there are points available for them. So this is great news for college grads. All of our programs are 1 or 2 years, some are a 3rd year, but there's great points available here for them. And similarly, if you reside in Sault Ste. Marie, this is also great news for Sault College students and Sault College grads, is that there are points available. So someone could own property and they could demonstrate that with mortgage statements, bank letters, proof of ownership. There are points available, but even for those who do not own property, if they can prove that they have a lease and they are residing here at the time of application, there are also points available. So it's important here to note that they stipulate that you live in these properties at the time. So it's not a matter of buying property, but living elsewhere. They specify that you must be living here at the time of application and in the property in order to earn these points. They're looking also to see that an applicant might have ties to the community. So the way this is demonstrated is either an immediate family member who is a permanent resident or citizen, that has been living in Sault Ste. Marie for at least 1 year, or it could be an extended family member, and they've defined that here as a grandparent, uncle, aunt, cousin, niece, nephew, or it can be a friend or a representative of an established community organization, and again, who is a permanent resident or Canadian citizen who has been living in Sault Ste. Marie for at least 1 year. Now, they're going to want a proof of relationship through a letter of support, and they're saying that only 1 letter per application can be submitted. And so when they're saying the established community organization, examples that have been provided could include members of faith groups, clubs, sports clubs, anywhere where someone can demonstrate that they have ties in the community, that letter can still earn some points. For those who have never lived in Sault Ste. Marie, there are still opportunities where they can earn some points. So if the applicant would have to visit Sault Ste. Marie for at least 5 nights in the past 3 years, and they must have met with at least 2 employers in their line of work during the visit. That can earn some points. They will ask for receipts from hotels, potentially contact information for those employers that you met with as demonstration that you did in fact meet these steps. They're also looking for authentic knowledge and interest in the recreational, cultural, or lifestyle activities in Sault Ste. Marie. And for those who have a spouse or a common law partner, if their spouse or partner has a valid job offer in one of those priority knock groups, there can be points available. Or if the spouse or common law partner has 2 years of work experience at least, and they're saying that has to be full-time, continuous, within the priority knock group, there are also points available. There are also points available for the applicant's spouse or common law partner meeting at least the CLB 5 in all categories. And again, there will need to be proof of designated language test results, which are no more than 2 years old. And so this is just a little box we've made in order to demonstrate how to calculate your total. It's not possible to have a full score of 131. It's just to show you the total points available in each category. But obviously, as I've explained, some of these categories are for people who have resided in Sault Ste. Marie, and others are for people who have never resided in Sault Ste. Marie. So it's just to demonstrate if you can at least get 70 points, then your application can be considered by the recommendation committee in Sault Ste. Marie. And so for those who have at least 70 points, again, make sure the applicant checks to see if they have met the federal eligibility requirements. And from there, there is the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot application form. It is on the Welcome to SSM website. It is submitted online. They are not accepting paper-based applications for this. All of the applications are online, and they'll request your supporting documents so that the applicant should have proof of all of these things prepared. So if someone has said they've met their 70 points, they're going to want proof that they should get the points in each of those categories. The application is then reviewed by the Community Recommendation Committee. They are to be meeting monthly. And if someone is selected, they will receive a nomination letter, which will then be used to apply for permanent residence to the federal government. So I know that's a lot. I can begin to take some questions. And again, so all of the criteria that I have listed between the federal and community are available on these two websites. It's all public information. But if anyone has any questions that I can help clarify, I'm very happy.
Hello. Yes, I have one question regarding the Sault Ste. Marie Committee and the federal government. So if Sault Ste. Committee gives you the letter of a nominee, is there still a possibility that federal government can reject your application?
Yes, that's a good question. So the federal government is who is responsible for immigration in Canada. Is ultimately, it's their responsibility. So the community criteria are based to see if you'll get a recommendation from Sault Ste. Marie. From there, someone still always has to meet the federal criteria as well as federal admissibility criteria. So they examine for things that are not on this list. They examine all permanent residents. So there are other aspects to a permanent resident application that make sure that you are admissible, and they still look at all of those aspects.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Can you give me an example of what the actual journey of an international student would look like if they're enrolled into this type of a program? If they want to enroll into this type of program and let's say they're at Sault College.
Mm-hmm. So the way it would look, we have some grads who are already looking at this. Just the timing was very fortunate for them. But say if someone was enrolled right now in a 2-year program, they would graduate from that program, and if they found full-time permanent work, they could then apply through this program so long as their employer is in the community and meets those community-specific requirements for the employer. So what's nice about it is if the student is in a 2+ year program, when they graduate, they don't have to demonstrate work experience. They can just, if they find their job, they could potentially apply for this. The flip side of that is a lot of students are in 1-year programs, or a lot of our postgraduate students take 2 1-year postgraduate programs. It's the 1+1. In which case they would need to demonstrate their work experience for this. However, some of them already have qualifying work experience from before they've come to Canada, in which case they can submit proof of that and they could potentially begin the process. Otherwise,
sorry,
go ahead.
No, just there are 2 other questions that are in conversation. So question number 1, Irene is asking if we can use this nomination for express entry application, for example.
No, this is a separate process from express entry. And so it would be an application for permanent residence, but it is not an express entry application.
Great. And the other question is, so you've mentioned it's a new program. It's not a brand new program, right? It's been already for some time. And if you've seen already some applications being processed at Sault Ste. Marie.
This is in fact a brand new program. So they've only announced this pilot program. It was back in June. This is a brand new immigration pilot program. There are 11 communities across Canada which have been selected to take part in this initial 3-year pilot. The community criteria in Sault Ste. Marie was just released in November. I believe only 2 or 3 of the 11 communities have so far released their criteria. So it is a brand new program. And so I can't speak to the success of any students because they really haven't worked through the process yet. I know we do have some graduates who are applying or in the process of applying right now, but it's a very new process.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? We still have some time if you have any questions to ask.
Yes. So we have a lot of students coming from India, for example. So I know that some schools have now put in a little bit of diversity quotas just because they're being overwhelmed with applications, let's say, from the Punjabi region. My question then is this program then going to put the same type of diversity quotas where, they'll take, I don't know, 10 here from this country, 10 from this country to make sure that it's a little bit more equal just in terms of distribution of the nationalities, or this is no relevance to this?
No, I'm not aware of any criteria around ethnicity, diversity, anything in that way. It is really dependent on the employers selecting people who are eligible and selecting people who really meet their needs. It's an economic program. It's based on employer need and filling economic gaps in Sault Ste. Marie. And then just to confirm for the other questions I'm seeing here, there have not been any nominations yet to my knowledge because the criteria has only been live for a couple of weeks.
Okay. Anyone else?
To apply something for this, does the student need to consult an IRCC consultant, or they can just go on the website and you said everything is based online anyway?
I always recommend that students consult with someone, be it an immigration lawyer, an IRCC consultant, someone who is legally able to give them the best immigration advice. And here's why. There are a number of permanent residence pathways, and I think it's very important that someone take a look and see what is the best fit for them if they are a fit for any of the pathways. So this is one option. Yes, the criteria are all available on the website, and I'm sure there will be a large number of people who intend to apply for themselves, but there are some areas that I think students that I have talked to struggle with. For example, some students have a hard time deciding which of their NOC codes is actually most applicable to their current work or their work experience. And if they have a qualifying job offer, they're struggling to see if it does in fact qualify because they're not 100% clear on their NOC code. So for reasons such as those, I do think it's important to consult with someone who can give very good advice.
Okay, and is there a cost to apply to something for this program in terms of application fees?
So there's no cost that I'm aware of at the community level. There is still the permanent residence application fees from the federal government. So it's around $1,000. So there's the $550 processing fee and then the right of permanent residence fee, which is $490, and those would be for one person.
There is one question. So basically, they're asking, what is the ideal plan for a foreigner person who would like to be nominated or who would like to apply through this path to their permanent residency?
I mean, immigration is never a guarantee. I think an ideal would be a student who graduates from Sault College from a 2-year program and they find a job offer right away. So we do have some programs which can be very in demand. I know that healthcare was one of the fields listed in the priority NOC groups. So it's very likely and very possible that someone could find full-time permanent employment directly out of school in some of the more in-demand occupations, which is why those areas are a priority. It doesn't require that you have studied or lived in Sault Ste. Marie, and so it's really hard to say that there is an ideal. But without fail, it is absolutely essential that someone can find a qualifying job offer from an employer in Sault Ste. Marie.
And then I'm also curious about Sault College. When these international students come in, and I know that they require a lot of assistance and they've done a wonderful job so far, but once they graduate, is there going to be on-campus support where it's going to explain these options to them and they can then easily access this?
So currently the support we're providing is that we're offering workshops very similar to this to our students to make sure that they understand the opportunities that are available. There are also groups of people who come through from IRCC and from other organizations to present to students about other permanent residence pathways as well, to make sure that they have some level of information and hopefully are as informed as possible about the options available to them if they're hoping to stay in Canada. What we're not currently able to do is file applications for students. So I'm available to meet with students when they have really specific questions about their current immigration status. And for grads, we have been encouraging them to come to our information sessions. And then I am really strongly encouraging them to reach out to a professional to make sure that they're getting really good advice and having their full profile assessed before they're making a decision as important as a permanent residence application.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
No problem. I see a question about the duration of the pilot here. Is that the one, Olga, or?
So there are a few other questions that I can see here. So yes, there is one about the duration. How is this pilot expected to continue? So if, for example, students are entering Sault College in September 2021, will they still, we don't know, will they still have this opportunity to apply through this pilot program?
So currently it is a 3-year pilot program. There is certainly hope, as with most pilots, it's intended to be a test to see how this goes, and then hopefully it will continue. There is certainly hope within the community criteria, or within the community committee that I've spoken to, that it will carry on longer than that. But presently, yes, it is a 3-year pilot program.
Okay, great. And maybe you also see that one person is asking, well, first of all, how far it is from Toronto, and it is a little bit, you can maybe explain what's the best way to get to Toronto. And then another question is if there is any quota, and if, for example, the candidates have already 70 points, from abroad, if they can apply for this pilot.
So for the first question, Sault Ste. Marie by car is around 7 hours driving from Toronto. Weather maybe give or take a little bit of time because of weather conditions. So today is a snowy day. People would drive a little more slowly. By airplane, it's around a 1-hour flight. So it's not very difficult. It's very accessible from Toronto, but it's not just the next town over. It is in Northern Ontario, as are all of the Ontario cities selected for this pilot. And then, is there a quota annually? So IRCC has set a cap for the first year for all of the communities participating, and they have done that to make sure that the communities have the capacity and are working through a process to make sure that people who are coming through this pilot are being properly settled in the community. So currently it is 100 nominations in the first year. That doesn't mean only 100 people. That could mean 100 primary applicants. So if there was someone who came and they brought their spouse and their children, that is 1 nomination. Or that could be a single person, and same, it is 1 nomination. The 70 points does not guarantee nomination. The 70 points is the minimum number of points you would need for your application to be considered by the Community Recommendation Committee, and they'll be taking a look at people's ties to the community and the best fit, as well as the economic needs.
Okay, great. Well, I think, is there any other questions? Okay, will a student who studies 2 credit certificates of 1 year each be eligible? That's the question.
Yes, so this is one I get very commonly. I try to be very clear about this. So someone who has studied 2 1-year certificates can still be eligible for the pilot program. What they are not is exempt from the requirement for work experience. There is a minimum requirement of work experience under the federal criteria, and so it requires that you have studied in a 2-year or longer program in order to be exempt, and so in that case, it doesn't.
So people asking for the recording to be sent. I did start the recording, so I will see how it turned out. About the presentation, I'm not sure. But I think that's basically it for our webinar for today. But thank you so much for attending. Thank you for being today with us. If you have any questions, you can always write directly to Heather or to myself. I can resend again our emails. Oh, there's one last question to you, Heather. Is it compulsory if Canadian to have a work experience in Canada, basically, if it's like necessary for Hungary?
No. I strongly encourage everyone to go to the websites that are up on the screen right now. The criteria is very specific. So it says qualifying work experience, and it can have been in Canada or it can have been overseas. So long as it has been in the last 3 years. Let me just confirm that number. Yes, so 1 year continuous work experience in the last 3 years inside or outside of Canada. So it must meet the qualifying work experience in the relevant amount of time, but it doesn't have to have been in Canada.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much, Heather. It was amazing, great presentation, very interesting. Again, everybody can contact us directly. We'll be also happy to set up separate trainings if necessary, either about Sault College or the language gallery or the pathway to Sault College. And already after, if they would like to immigrate, a little bit more information about that. It is really a pleasure, and thank you again so much. We'll try to be organizing this kind of webinars maybe every 2 months because we have a huge interest. Thank you, Heather. It was really, really great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you, Oya, for organizing.
No problem. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you.